Hey, Conrad, how are you?
Hi, Alleluia. How are you?
I'm here talking with Conrad this morning about his new book that KULARTS is publishing. You want to introduce yourself, like hold your book up and...
I'm Conrad Benedicto, and this is my new fantasy novel, Musalaya's Gift.
What is Musalaya? Why Musalaya?
What is Musalaya?
Does it mean anything? Is it somebody, say, your first love?
Musalaya is the name of a person, a young woman whose photo I saw on a photography book when I was in college. She's an ancestor who discovered how to do something with her music that nobody has ever been able to do since. And so that's what the whole premise of the title is, Musalaya's Gift, is rediscovering what she was able to do with it that nobody has been able to replicate for years and years and years.
In the book, you have so many different characters as well. And of course, the hero is Alad. Tell us a little bit more how you came up with Alad.
You know, a lot of the characters are bits and pieces of me and bits and pieces of people that I know. So Alad to me is the person whose life revolves around his art and who's sort of clueless about other things, except when he's playing music, then he's completely in control and completely empowered. But, you know, Alad sort of reminds me of some artists that I know, some musicians that I know, who are, when they have their instruments in their hands, they transform into these, you know, incredible, amazing, completely in control people with vision. But when they don't have their instruments in their hands, they're sort of like almost bungling and not, you know, not really very self-aware. So that's one facet of him. And then to me, he's also just kind of like the boy, you know, the son, who is trying to figure out who he is, and he's trying to deal with a lot of the things that many young people of color have to deal with in a colonized situation, where he's trying to, you know, he has these traditions and cultures that he really loves, but his faith in those things is constantly being tested. I have two older sisters and two older brothers. I'm the youngest. And a lot of the scenery and a lot of just the general feeling and setting in the book, those are all from memories that I had just sort of playing around and having adventures with my cousins and my brothers in the island where my dad is from. You know, the scenery in the book, you know, the islands, the ocean, those are all from personal memories of my
What
childhood.
province?
Romblon.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. That's where my dad's from.
So in your dad's village or, you know, town, is that where the grandparents are and, like, you know, the elders? Who do you visit? I mean, that's obviously ancestral homeland for your dad, so.
Yeah,
who's there?
Yes, my grandmother and granddad lived there in the town. My grandfather was actually sort of famous in that town for being the first person to bring electricity. Like he opened like a little movie theater, and you know, when you run a movie theater, you have to run generators. And so the generators that run the movie theater also ended up being wired to the rest of the town. So I remember as a kid, every night, when are the generators gonna come on? That's when the first movie time is. And then when are the generators gonna shut off and you have no more electricity? It's when the last movie ends from the movie theater.
Wow. So it's not like the church bell rules the town. It's the generator. That's
I remember I remember in the movie theater, wooden benches, screen, and I remember getting bit by surot. Those in the movie theater. So it's very, it's a very provincial setting, but
does it make it in the book?
No, the feeling of it, I think, makes it in the book, but not those details. My parents did give me these Filipino myth books when I was a kid. Beautifully illustrated Filipino myth books. And those along with, the compendium of fairy tales that was like Bible, think of the Bible of
European
the European fairy tales. I ate all those up as a kid. And those, and then of course the stories that were told to me by my aunties and nannies and everybody when I was a kid, those were highly influential and impactful.
So tell me one story that either a nanny or auntie or whoever told you that remember to this day, including the feels of it, sense memory.
Yeah. Somebody actually told me when I was a kid, that they were half aswang.
This is your family member?
No, this was a nanny that was taking care of me, and she said, "Yeah, I'm half aswang. One half red, my blood, one half red, and one half of it is black. It's aswang." And I was just like, "Oh my God, you're so awesome and scary." And I was really tied to the hip of Lina. That was her name. I call her Nanay, which probably caused some tension with my mom, because I called my mom, and I called Lina Nanay. But she was the one who really she was the one who put the fear of in me with all these stories. And I was not afraid, all the stuff from the Bible and all that stuff. That was not scary. The stuff that Lina told me, that was scary.
And where was Lina from?
Iloilo. So I was like, oh, Iloilo. But she was the one who told me one time when I was sleeping, I used to be able to sleep completely, restfully and fantastically on my back. And she was the person who told me, "Ay, mukhang patay ka pag natutulog kang ganyan." So now I have back problems because I can't sleep on my back anymore. I have to sleep on my stomach or my side.
Because of that?
Because I literally had to learn not to sleep like that because she said that to me. And of course, if you look like a dead person, you're gonna end up like a dead person in your sleep. So just things like that, all of these, these are not novels, and I could not name an author except to name the person who told me. But those are the stories that are way in here. Everything else, intellectual, emotional, all the books that I just shared with you, those are all sort of they don't grab as deep as those myths that you were taught when you were a kid. And so,
especially by your Ilongga nanny.
Yeah.
And she's like, "You're not taking a nap right now. I'm going to pull out my Aswang.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is also, again, we're talking about how our myths and our stories change over time. But I've always had a suspicion that a lot of it was, not that I've grown up, a lot of it was sort of like control, making me behave, but also a lot of it probably rooted in some very practical ecological practices, like when you're walking in the woods, be careful of where you walk, and you say excuse me, right? Those are great. Those are just simply awesome ways to be when you're with nature, right? Be respectful. Don't trample things. You might step on spirits. I mean, as a kid, when learning that just allowed me to live in this world not as a destroyer, right? All of those taboos, all of those rules, I think were actually based on like, how do we negotiate, navigate, respect the natural world that we live in?
For sure, yeah.
They make sense to me. Mm-hmm. Even the monsters make sense to me as sort of reminders that the natural world is wondrous, but also pretty cutthroat, right? And that's Marilaga in the book.
Right. I mean, nature is kind of like it does itself. So,
yeah.
You hear stories of people jogging in Florida, this whatever that area, and they have their earbuds on, and then a crocodile comes out and drags them away. Yeah. Whereas like paying attention of tabi-tabi po, whatever. Yeah. It sets you. It seems like it's based on some belief system that is not scientific, but as you said, there's practical application to knowing that, and not act like that you can just walk anywhere, run anywhere, and not paying any mind. And nature is not being mean; it's just there.
Yeah. You want to hear another story?
Sure.
From a kid? Mm-hmm. This is unforgettable story, but in my dad's island, there was a story of this guy who came back from Manila. And he was like sitting by the ocean, and he saw these like baby octopuses, and he was like, I love baby octopuses. So like he took all these baby octopuses, cooked them, and he ate them. And he immediately got sick for no reason, on the edge of death. And then the story goes that they took him to a healer, and the healer said, those weren't baby octopuses that you ate. Those were like spirits. And I can save you now, but you can never go back to the island. So the dude left the island, stayed away, lived a nice life for a while in the city, and then one day decided, I miss home, I'm gonna go home. That's just a story. So gets on a boat, and the closer they got to the island, the more sick he felt. And story goes, by the time the boat reached the port, the guy was dead.
Did that make that in the story?
No, that did not make that in the story. I would not have told you that if I had made that in the story, in the book. But that's just an example of all these things that I've grown up with. And I run an environmental education science program. So I'm all about the science, and I'm all about, physics and all that. But those two things are not, one can live here and one can live here and tell me how to behave.
Well, maybe it's actually, there's a scientific reason, but we haven't discovered it yet.
Yeah.
Maybe he's allergic to something in the island.
Yeah.
Who knows, right? Maybe it was like red tide or whatever, riptide,
Yeah.
or whatever it's called. He ate the. Did anybody else eat the octopus?
Oh, I don't know. That's
right.
the only part of the story I know. But in some case, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether you can scientifically prove it as a person who's all about the science. It doesn't matter. What matters is what is the grain of truth in that story that can teach you something.
In that story, what is the grain of truth for you?
In that story, yeah, what's the grain of truth? Truth is that you can't just like go somewhere and grab things and eat them whenever you want, right? That's a big thing in this book, is the notion of permission. Like you can't take without permission. And so who are you going to ask it from? You have to ask it from somebody, something. And just that practice already means that you're not an asshole. You know what I mean? That practice already means the fact that your first act should be, oh, can I please do this? Do I have permission to do this? Is this okay before I do it? When it comes to the land, the people, the culture, what does it matter if the creature that taught me that is not real? It's a good lesson.
Okay, I want to talk about the folktale, or the legends that you put in. By the way, I'm so enthralled with them. It's just all the different stories within the book. So you have the famous kulintang hero, Amal. Tell us a little bit about Amal and how you came up with, whatever, story, inspiration,
well,
crocodiles.
Amal, well, first of all, the name is sort of a tribute, an homage to Danny's teacher, Amal. Lumuntod. But I didn't put the same last name, obviously. And I never knew Amal Lumuntod, so the character of Amal is not based on him at all. I just wanted to give him that name as a tribute. But Amal really is, I wanted to imagine who would have been like a celebrity, like a movie star back then. Like the movie stars that we grew up with in the Philippines, that kind of renown. And I was trying to imagine what that would look like in a setting where there are no movies, there is no Hollywood or Filipino Hollywood, but your celebrity is based on, a traditional practice. In this case, being a musician. And so that's sort of like the germ of his character, is that I was trying to imagine, what would it be like? How can I take that that picture or that symbol or that feeling of the celebrities that I used to watch on TV and put somebody like that into a story like this? So that was part of what I wanted to do with this character. And the other part that I wanted to do was, again, I mean, there's a lot of questions about artists that I kind of try to look at in this book. And so he was the artist that did everything for his art, didn't have children, didn't have a family, didn't put down roots like that. And so for me, his character, that was his sort of arc. What does this all mean now at the end of my life, that I did this instead, I chose this instead, I chose my music instead of raising children.
So it's a very interesting way of looking at, because I didn't know him very well, but I met him a few times. Amal Lumuntod himself, and it's completely different from your imagination. Which is sure. Which is great. I mean, that's what imagination is about. And I think he was married a few times. And so
there you go.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting in terms of point of view. You know, in the traditional culture where it's actually kind of like people are given a different kind of status symbol, like literally women fay over, you know, they have groupies that follow kulintang musicians.
Wow.
Or, you know, so it's like it's a very kind of different approach to it. So it's good to see kind of like, okay, this is your world.
Yeah,
and so
definitely.
You know, and basically you're not trying to write Amal Rumuntod's life. It's really it's just you know, it's a great name, and you know, it's honoring your teacher, which brings us to Danongan Kalanduyan, the great late Danongan Kalanduyan.
Yes.
Who I think is the grandfather of American kulintang music. So,
I agree.
Tell me a little bit more. How long did you study with him? Were you a musician before that? You know, what drew you to the music?
The first time I heard kulintang music was in college. Perfect time to hear it because you're all wrapped up in your, you know, self-rediscovery in college and learning about your history, trying to reclaim your culture. And so the first time I heard kulintang music was in UC Santa Cruz. And it wasn't Danny Kalanduyan. It was one of his students. They performed at a cafe. And then there was another performance at a college night. We have those there where there's a cultural...
This was when?
This was in 1990... 1992?
Okay.
No, 1991. Second year, or 1990. But yeah, that was a long time ago. And it really, kulintang, I'm sure many other people, especially young people who experience kulintang for the first time, have this same reaction to it. You know,
what was your reaction?
My reaction was, wow, here was music that is from the Philippines. That is, you know, not. If I, you know, back then I was always, I was already kind of dreaming and wondering about, well, what could it have been before the colonizers came? Or what would have happened, you know, what were we like? Who were we before all of that? And to me, and I'm sure for many other people, especially here in the United States, kulintang was this thunderous symbol of that. You know, oh, this is what it was like before. You know, here is something from our past that has survived, and it's there. I can learn it. And it was incredible. It really lit a fire. And that was actually the moment where basically the idea of this book came to me. Yeah, the idea of, something about the music and something about resistance in a fantasy setting. And so I actually started writing this book right after I graduated from college, before I started learning kulintang. But we can all imagine what, you know, what would have resulted from me trying to write a fantasy story with sort of kulintang being a major part of it without knowing kulintang, you know. So obviously that, I wrote hundreds and hundreds of pages, and it was not good. So then I finally did meet Danny.
And how many years was the gap between starting to write and, you know, hearing music, then starting to write this novel, and then meeting Danny?
Yeah, thank you. So I heard the music in probably 1990 or 1991, started feverishly writing the first couple of hundred pages of the book, which was, you know, all crap, to be honest, you know, after I graduated in 1993. So 1993, 94 was when I, you know, wrote a bunch. And then I didn't actually start studying under Danny until 1997.
Did any of those first drafts made it in the book at all?
Did any of the
Writing is hard.
did anything from the first draft make it into the book at all? Some feelings and some scenes made it, but most of it is in the, it's in my cabinet.
Yeah. So the kernel was there. So you have to go through so many process in order for,
Oh my God. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're in 2021. How did Danny change your writing? Or did you kind of like, okay, I'm gonna leave this alone and then I'll pick it up later? How did that work?
Yeah, I totally dropped the book for years, like 18 years. And it's because of two things. One, I became a teacher. Excuse me. And I, that's a whole life in and of itself. And I created lessons and built a program with my friends and Catherine, who I'm her husband. I don't like to say she's my wife. I'm her husband.
You're her partner.
I'm her partner, yeah. So there was that whole interval in between where I was learning how to be a teacher and living that life, and that is something that's very important to me, still is. And also, I was learning kulintang all that time. So from 1997 until, basically when Danny passed in 2016, I was studying under him.
But when did you pick up the novel again?
Probably 2014, around that time.
Oh, before he died.
Yeah. So I was writing it again and revisioning it.
So how did that change you? Since you had like a whole decade almost of, life's experience, then learning kulintang music from Danny, learning about not only music but culture.
Yeah.
And does he make it in the book? Okay, that'll be the mystery.
Yeah.
But yeah, how did it change?
It certainly made all of the parts of the book where kulintang music is being played. It certainly made that a lot more personal and based on raw lived experience. That's really the difference. So, the feeling that people have playing it in the story, the effect of it, the effect that it has on one's spirit, those are all that I try to convey. Those are all feelings and emotions that I lived being a student of it. And then, of course, there are the technical descriptions of it that I wouldn't have been able to convey without knowing the technical aspects of kulintang. And I think one of the great feedback that you gave me actually was that some of my descriptions of the music in the book were too technical. And then when you asked me to work on that and sort of describe the playing of it and describe the instruments in a more kind of like artistic, abstract way instead of being so technical, that was actually a really big help, because I was, kind of like when I was describing it in some places in the book, it was too much the technician musician writing instead of looking at it from, sort of like the artistic beauty angle, which I think you identified quite expertly, and that's one of the things that I think improved tremendously in the book when I revised it based on your feedback.
So, I mean, kulintang music is throughout, but it's not really. In some ways, it's not really about kulintang music, but it is.
It's not.
It is, but it isn't. So,
Yeah.
like you said, oh, nobody's going to learn how to play kulintang if they read this book or whatever. It's basically one of those things that you decided to put into this fantastic world that you've created.
Yeah.
And kind of negotiating, the inspiration, the real kind of inspiration versus, not versus, but and with this created world of yours.
Yeah.
So having said that, what about the monsters, the ghouls, what I find fascinating are the way you've created, let's say, the capre, and the way you created the manananggals, but not quite the manananggals, and distinctly talking about, well, they're not your usual native manananggal.
Yeah.
So how do you set, kind of like anchor it on some stuff that's real that people can relate to, and then flying onto, to your imagination and creating a different rendering of it?
Yeah. I had fun doing that. I had fun sort of like accessing all of the stuff that terrified me as a kid. You know what I mean? That's where that comes from. This visceral fear of all of these monsters that I was taught existed. So sort of like, taking that feeling and then changing it a little bit in terms of, being different from the kind of, creatures that I grew up, thinking were gonna eat me one day. And I think the big thing that I wanted to do with the monsters is that I wanted to just ask this question: what happens to our monsters after colonization? What do we fear? Who do we fear? And are the monsters, or are the creatures that we fear now, are they really representative of what they were back then? Or has that changed because of the experience of being colonized? And so I sort of asked that question in the book. That's why I play with the notion of the audience, if they're Filipino, thinking, oh, this monster is supposed to be like this, but in the book it's not. That's all a part of that question that I'm trying to ask, which is, all of our mythologies, even the scary ones, and all of our mythical creatures, even the scary ones, how have those stories been affected or impacted by all of these other ideologies and all of these other values being imposed on indigenous people?